Hi guys, and welcome to my TG Patch Sap Tank guide. I've dusted off old Steals Away Blood, the progenitor of Sap Tank, the grandfather Sap Tank, the oldest living hemophage in Tamriel history himself. And we're going to do some knowledge bomb drops in this intro. So the way that I'm going to do the guides is I want to do an intro video that sort of just sets the pace, talks about, changes this patch, why does Sap Tank get nerfed so much, looking at the mechanical side of things, and then talking about what we're going to do to change and fix it this patch. What are our plans? And then after that intro guide's over, I'm going to make a separate PvE guide for, an item, skill, CP guide for PvE, and then another one for PvP. And that's kind of the way that I'm going to do it. So let's, to start things out, let's talk about my theory on why Sap Tank is such a nerfed archetype. Now, I've been playing this archetype since there was an ESO, and let me tell you, just by my count, it is the most nerfed archetype, both directly and indirectly, and I've developed a theory as to why. It really comes down to a misunderstanding of mechanics that comes from new players. Sap Tank is a very hard thing to fight against when you're new. It's very confusing, and it all boils down to the red bar and the green bar and the blue bar being a mystery to new players. Whenever you're fighting a Sap Tank and you're new to this game, it just doesn't respond like the rest of the builds do. You hit him, sometimes his health doesn't move, you have no clue how much mana he has left, you have no clue how much stamina he has left, and this lack of understanding and ability to sort of counterplay in a game where a common tactic is to sort of manipulate your enemy's stats, to be completely blind to what an enemy's stats are at, is really, I guess, a bad feeling for a lot of players. I really think that's why Cinemax comes down so hard on the archetype. But I'd also like to talk a little bit about a mechanic behind that. It's something that's not well known even today. Back in the old days, and even today, I hear things like, if you see somebody blocking, you should crushing shock them, because crushing shock hits 3 times, and that'll charge them 3 times for block. Comments like that, they show me that people don't understand the phase-based calculations that ESO has. So I'd like to talk a little bit about phase-based calculations. And I can give some real simple and easy examples for that too. Have you ever gone to execute someone and you know you got your execute off clean and you know you had enough damage to kill them, but they got a heal off after, and you know it came after, but for some reason they don't die and they get the heal. You get full execute damage, but they get the heal off in time, and you're kind of scratching your head like, that timing was weird. That's phase-based calculations. So as an example, we'll just go over the course of a second, or we don't even need to get through with the whole second. We're an eighth of a second in. The game asks, how much damage did you take? We say, okay, we took 5,000 damage. Okay, how much healing did you take? Well, I've got 4,000 healing. Did you block during this phase? Not how many times did you block, but did you block during this eighth of a second phase? Yes, I blocked. Okay, so what does the game do? It gives you 1,000 damage, and it charges you for block. Once. Just once. Then we get 2/8 of a second into the next calculation phase. Did you block? Yes, I blocked. Okay, I'm charging you for block. How much damage did you take? Well, I only took 3,000 this time. Okay, how much healing? 7,000. Well, congratulations, you're back up to full health. It continues to do that over the course of an entire second. These phase calculations are not very well understood, and they should be. In the past, I've kept this knowledge to myself, not really educated anybody about it, because it's powerful to know things that other people don't know. But there's a lot of nerfs that come when people don't know things. They can't properly counterplay, and if somebody can't properly counterplay a thing in your game, inevitably that thing is going to get nerfed. So I mean, if you understand phase-based calculations, then there's counterplay to hot-based healers, there's counterplay to block tanks, in PvP, but you have to understand that it's not the number of attacks that you're doing. It's to make sure that you hit one per calculation phase. So over the course of a second, they get charged at every window they possibly could get charged at. In the beginning of the game, if you fought a player who understood this or naturally had attack patterns that played into this mechanic, it was much harder to block versus than somebody who was literally just hitting Crushing Shock as fast as they could. I could block that guy forever, even now with all the nerfs. But someone who actually understood those attack patterns was really hard to block back then. So how does this play into Sap Tank? Well, first of all, Sap Tank was a big block build. It still is, because the biggest way that we can leverage our better stam management into raw power in PvP is to block more often than another player can, with reason. And so we're definitely a block caster sort of build, and so nerfs to that definitely hurt us. The other reason is we're hot and mid-based tanks, so we're taking the damage that you do and lowering it down, a good bit, and then we're frequently getting small heals. Now, why does that matter? Well, the thing about it is, if in one calculation phase I can manage to get you down to, say, 5k incoming damage, and at any given moment I'm guaranteed with my frequent COTS to have at least 1k healing coming in, then your incoming damage looks really paltry compared to what you're used to. Take your 10k tooltip surprise attack, half it for being in Cyrodiil, half it again for my mid, half it again for me blocking, and then in one calculation phase add in, say, 1500 heals from one of my random HOTS, and suddenly you're using your surprise attack and my health's not moving, and you're super confused as to why. Now, I've invested a lot into being that tanky, and you're attacking me in a strong point without trying to counterplay into my build. But that doesn't stop you from looking at me and going, holy shit, this guy. So that's the reason for Sap Tank's nerfs. Not understanding these mechanics creates these vacuums, these voids where counterplay's not available and the enemy has no clue what's going on. So hopefully this video talking about that mechanic will educate the community a little bit more. Maybe some athletes will go out and get more decisive information about this mechanic. This is something that I've been using for a long time, but my testing on it hasn't been extensive. It's actually a pretty hard thing to test, to really pin down, but I'm sure of it. I mean, I can go and pull enough monsters that if each one hit me once, my stamina would be gone if I was being charged per attack, and my stamina does not instantly disappear, when it should if it was charged per attack. So I know that stamina costs are charged per calculation phase. Healing and incoming damage war against each other within calculation windows that are around 1/8 of a second. It may be less, it may be more, but around 1/8 of a second. So now that we've got that out of the way, let's move on to what changed this patch. Why do we feel the need to rework Sap Tank? Well, for this particular patch, now there's been tons of changes. I pretty much reworked Sap Tank every major patch, completely new build, to work around all of the target nerfs and indirect nerfs and game landscape changes. This has been a labor of love to keep this build current, and the only difference now is that I'm sort of welcoming the community into my internal dialogue as I go through these birthing pains of making my Sap Tank work for this current rendition of the game. But now that we're here, what's that thought process? What's hindering us? And it really all comes down to the changes to caltrips and twisting path, no longer proccing siphoning attacks, but to understand that we have to go further back to the change of siphoning attacks from a toggle to a buff. Okay, so let me explain what it was before. As a toggle, before it didn't stress the blue bar or the green bar at all. it was sort of equal amongst them, which meant as you did stuff, you could sustain both bars equally. All you paid for was damage. You lost damage for using the stat sustain tool. Now obviously this favored tank the most. DPS didn't really want to lose their damage unless it was a severely long fight where they needed the sustain, and there weren't very many of those. So siphoning attacks was really only good for a tank, because only a tank cared about or didn't care about losing damage. But because it didn't stress magicka or stamina, it could be used equally to seesaw both stats or just reliably to help one stat or the other. And the second thing was, because it didn't have a cost, you didn't need to stress an attack frequency to force the proc rates. So this is a 10% chance whenever you use skills. It's roughly 1 in 10 skills. Now, if you're not paying for anything, these 10 skills could easily just be stretched out over a period of time. Now, incoming, we changed to a toggle. It now has a mana cost. This is actually great for DPS. Let's take a Stam DPS. It doesn't really use its magicka, so it doesn't mind using it for a 15-second buff, and while it's up, any Stam sustain to their main stat is great for them. So they love it. A magicka caster, they're in full light armor, they have high magicka regen, good cost reduction. They don't mind the cost penalty of this skill, and they also don't need it as much because their magicka sustain is good and golden, and they really only need siphoning attacks to sort of over the course of the fight replenish their stamina bar, so that when the next CC comes up or the next dodge roll comes up, they have the stamina to do it because siphoning attacks has been passively boosting their stamina bar. Those two archetypes loved this change, but what it did was cripple the tank, because the math of it all doesn't work out. If I'm in heavy armor, I no longer have the magicka regen and the cost reduction to spam this skill every 15 seconds. But more importantly, if I'm spamming the skill every 15 seconds, I still need to make sure that I hit my 15 attacks that's 1 attack per second, which drives a heavy cost on my magicka. So you've got two options here. There's two ways this could go for a tank. Either you keep siphoning attacks up 24/7 and you get 14 attacks off in that next 15 seconds, and you do that, you have great stam sustain until your magicka's gutted, which happens really fast. Then you gas out a magicka, and then shortly thereafter your stamina plummets before you can recover, and then you die. Okay, well that's obviously not acceptable in PvE or PvP. The other option is that you slow play your magicka, and maybe you do half the number of attacks over the course of the 15 seconds. Well, in that case, you don't gut your magicka, but your stamina bar doesn't get the sustain help it needs from siphoning attacks, and you still end up even quicker run out of stamina and dead. So neither of these work out for a heavy armored tank. So why is that important? Well, caltrops and twisting path, the way that they used to work is they used to check the procs, which means I could throw this out and hit my siphoning attacks and know that over the next 15 seconds my twisting path was actually checking for me to check to see if I procced siphoning attacks. And it wasn't just checking 15 times, it was checking closer to 30 times, because it was ticking every half second. And by the same nature, if I threw out caltrops, it was checking siphoning attacks once per second for a very long duration, which meant I wasn't stressed anymore to spam my skills as fast as I could, double my mana bar, just to make sure that I had as many instances of siphoning attacks being available to proc as I possibly could. So anyway, those realities are what makes siphoning not really work for a tank anymore, and now that Twisting Path can no longer be used as a stat-free pre-buff to siphoning attacks checks, we're actually just for the first time feeling the brunt of the toggle change. That's really all it comes down to. Now there are fixes for this. They could actually move siphoning attacks to the base morph, then introduce leeching strikes as its own tank toggle morph and siphoning attacks as its own DPS caster morph. That way, I mean, what people want is this all other direct damage attacks have 10% chance to restore an additional blah blah blah. That's the effect that people want on this skill. You can move that effect to the base just like you did with so many other skills. You can move that to the base and then create a new morph, and congratulations, you have a toggle for tanks and a pre-buff for DPS. And I feel like that would solve it. Hopefully ZeniMax will listen to this and give us that, but in the meantime, heavy armor, it just doesn't work for us anymore. So, how are we going to fix this? Well, the thing about it is, if heavy armor's not working, we got to get rid of heavy armor. It's got terrible passives, it doesn't work with our kit anymore, and there are new tools in the game that allow us to play the way that we want to. Okay, so what's the answer? The answer for me was to move to light armor. By moving to 5 light, 1 heavy, 1 medium, you very easily pick up a lot of cost reduction and magicka regen that makes you more like a magicka caster in terms of using siphoning attacks and removes some of the stress of keeping this up. Now you might say, but if we do that, won't we be squishy? Well, not if we pay attention. What are we losing for switching off of heavy armor? Well, in reality, we're losing about 18% physical mitigation and probably about somewhere around 10% spell mitigation. Light armor actually has pretty decent spell resistance. We're losing 5% HP. We're losing the bracing passive. The bracing passive is not that important though. We're going to counter with some block cost enchants, and also the higher cast frequency of having more magicka sustained, allowing us to cast faster, is actually going to help us get more stam out of siphoning attacks. So we actually don't miss bracing. So there's one problem solved. Bracing, not missing it. Rapid mending was never clutch. It's helpful to have, but it's not even close to comparable to the passives. And actually, hitting harder with Prodigy and Concentration makes our heals hit harder on Nightblade anyway. So it's like we're kind of equivalent there. The max health, in Cyrodiil we already had too much health anyway. We're running around with 32k health, and we really only need like 24. So we're not really missing the 5% there either. In PvE, we can actually make gear adjustments to get that HP back. So that's not a reason to hang on to heavy armor. So all we're really left stuck with, where we're like, yeah, this is something we're gonna miss, is the mitigation. But if we move to CP, we notice that there was actually a change to the Hardy passive, making equivalent defenses through the CP for both magicka and stamina. Whereas before, there was less defense in the CP for stamina, or physical damage, and lots of defense against magicka damage. They've gone through and reworked it and made them sort of even. So now we have the Hardy tree, and look how much mitigation I just happen to have on my PvP CP setup. 19.5%. Exactly what we lost for not running heavy armor. Actually a little bit more than what we lost. So we're actually a little tankier than a previous patch heavy armor tank would be. So that's kind of the way that we're going to go. Obviously gear is going to make a huge difference, but we'll talk about gear in, the specific PvE, PvP guides. That pretty much concludes the sort of walkthrough intro. I hope you guys really enjoy this guide and the PvE and PvP item CP skill guide. Anyway, closing out. Done. I always forget to talk about race in my builds, so I decided to actually talk about it this time. I'll be brief. Essentially, race doesn't matter all that much for Sap Tank. In my opinion, the best races are Argonian and Breton. Breton helps to shore up the spell resistance no matter what build you run, which is really nice, and they give good magicka and good cost reduction. Argonian has some really interesting passives. They're not a super strong race right now, but Sap Tank is the one role where the things that they do get really shine. I've always been partial to the Argonian Sap Tank myself, so it's obviously the one that I chose. It used to be a lot stronger. The passives were stronger. The passives were more streamlined. With the recent changes, they're actually the strongest sustain race. As far as like racial passives towards sustain go, if you're using potions on cooldown, Argonian wins now in terms of stat management. And since it's an important part of a tank role, I think Argonian is a real solid choice. The new boost to health gives you easy HP thresholds and allows you some real fun build freedom. Ultimately, any race works. Imperial is a great race. Everything has sort of its own little nuance, and really it should be an opportunity to enjoy your race. It's not a very demanding build as far as race is concerned, so have fun, play whichever race you like. Those are my two sort of top end picks, would be Breton and Argonian. Plus, I mean, like, look, I look like a voodoo crocodile lord. I love it. Argonian sweet. Alright, so there, I did the race.